Hello everyone and welcome to a wonderful game you guys requested. It is from yesterday's Title Tuesday. It happened in the final round and it's MagnusCarlsen with white versus BogdanDeac. And BogdanDeac played an incredible tournament. He won all of his games and only drew 2 games. He drew against Matthias Bluebaum and against Sanan Sugirov. And he faces MagnusCarlsen with black in the final round. And what an opportunity, what a chance to finish not on a high note. I don't know what's above the high note, but this is definitely his chance. And this game is a story of, I would say, superhuman perseverance. And it's really been a while since we've seen something like this. So I'm just going to show it to you, and then you guys will understand what I'm talking about. And the clock times are especially important for this game, as it's a blitz game 3+2. So, you'll see what I mean. Magnus with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5 by BogdanDeac. Knight to f3. We have knight to f6 going for the Petrov's defense. Knight captures on e5, d6, and knight back to f3. We have knight captures on e4, d3, knight to f6, and pawn to d4. So all very standard. This is the classical stuff, the French attack against the Petrov defense, and is usually met with pawn to d5. If it's a classical game like pawn to d5, maybe bishop to e7. But here we have pawn to g6. And interestingly, Magnus did face this already once in a classical game. It was in Qatar Masters last year. He faced it in a game against Almutaya, and he won a very nice game. Yeah, I don't think BogdanDeac knows this. He could, of course. I mean, he's a very strong grandmaster. It's hard to say, how vast his theory knowledge is, but Magnus deviates from that game instantly. In that game, he played bishop to d3. Here he goes bishop to b5 with check. We have pawn to c6, bishop back to d3, and now bishop to g7. We have queen to e2 check, queen to e7, offering a queen trade, and Magnus trades. We have captures, and castles kingside. Rook to d8 and pawn to a4, stopping pawn to b5. We have pawn to c5, striking against the center, and Magnus goes knight to c3. C captures on d4. We have knight to b5 first, going after the rook on a8, and just knight to c6. And now if knight to c7, you can always play rook to b8, and now bishop to f4. Putting pressure on the d6 pawn, we have knight to d5 attacking the bishop, and bishop to g5 check. We have bishop to f6 blocking rook f to e1 check, and bishop to e6. And there doesn't seem to be a way for Magnus to take advantage of the king on e7. Maybe something like bishop to e4, but then the knight just moves to b4, and it doesn't look like it's doing all that much, unless you're ready to give up the bishop for the knight on c6. So Magnus starts trading. Bishop captures on f6, king captures, and knight captures back on d4. So he wins back the pawn. We have knight d to b4 attacking the bishop on d3, and a bishop back to f1. And now just knight captures on d4. Knight captures, we have rook a to c8, getting the last piece into the attack, and pawn to c3, of course defending and attacking. We have knight back to c6, offering a trade of knights, and now rook e to d1. So if you look at this position, it is, we could say, almost completely equal. Both players have two rooks, a knight, and a light square bishop. Magnus has a slightly better pawn structure. He does have 2 pawn islands, whereas BogdanDeac has 3 pawn islands and an isolated d pawn. But it's not something that you can actually push to an advantage. But of course, if we had to choose who's better here, it would be white, regardless of who is playing white. We have pawn to d5. Spending quite a lot of time on this. And if you also take a look at the clock, Magnus has 1 minute and 44 seconds, whereas BogdanDeac has 20 seconds on the clock. So okay, you have to play an entire endgame versus MagnusCarlsen on increment. So let's see how he does. We have pawn to a5, pawn to a6, stopping Magnus by in his plans of advancing the pawn to a6. We have pawn to f3 and knight to e5, already down to 9 seconds. It's move 25. He has 9 seconds to play against Magnus. King f2. Magnus playing the top move recommended by the engine, brings his king into the game. Rook to c5. We have rook to a3, rook to d7, and bishop to e2. And now knight to c4. Okay, putting pressure on the rook, offering the trade of bishop for knight, and Magnus should just go back, rook to a2, and keep the tension. But Magnus goes for the active idea. Bishop captures on c4, d captures, and now rook to a4. Okay, maybe Bogdan Daniel can go after the a5 pawn, but then Magnus will capture on c4 once the knight for bishop gets traded off, for example. We have rook d to d5 and rook d to a1, doubling up on the a file, defending the pawn on a5, bishop to d7, chasing away the rook, and now Magnus has to decide, does he go back? But if he goes back, how is he ever activating those rooks again? Or does he trade pawns and tries to play for activity? Magnus goes for activity. Rook to b4. Okay, bishop to c8, defending the pawn on b7, and now rook to b6 with check. Again, if you go back, those are very, very passive rooks, and obviously Magnus is playing for more than a draw here. Rook to b6 check, we have king to g7, and now rook to a4. Again, you can see the situation on the clock, Bogdan just playing on those 2 seconds increment the entire time. Pawn to h5, we have pawn to h4, and finally rook captures on a5. We have rook captures on c4 and rook 8 to c5. Offering a trade of rooks, Magnus obliges, rook captures on c5, rook captures, and rook to d6 now. We have rook to c7 and king to e3. Magnus starts bringing the king into the game. 3 seconds on the clock for Bogdan Daniel. We have bishop to d7, king to f4. We have king to f8 and rook to b6 now. King to e7, pawn to g4. H captures, we have f captures, and now bishop to c8. So okay, very passive position, and Magnus can create a passed pawn at any point if he wishes to do so, and he does. He plays pawn to h5. G captures, we have g captures, we have rook to c5, putting pressure on the h5 pawn. And how do you advance here? You cannot go king g5. The bishop covers g4, so you cannot play king to g4. How do you play this? Well, you could slow play with something like rook to h6, but it's unclear on how to make progress. So Magnus spends a lot of time on his clock, 40 seconds, and he plays pawn to h5. And now it's already 20 seconds for Magnus, and he gives Bogdan a clear way of how to continue. Rook to h5. I think Magnus spent a lot of time here because he was looking for a way to maybe take control of the game, maybe grab advantage, but there is none to be taken as it is an equal position. So okay, knight to b3. He will go after the b7 pawn. We have pawn to f6, now threatening rook captures on h6. King to e4. We have rook captures on h6, and now the position is still equal. Okay, black is up a pawn. Now it will be black who will be pushing for win if white isn't able to take control of the game by capturing on b7. And Magnus rushed it a little bit. He has to prepare it with something like king to e3, but he played knight to c5 right away, and now his position is dead lost. Of course, you guys see why, because you're comfortable in your own homes without a clock ticking. So feel free to pause the video and figure out what Magnus missed while I give you a couple of seconds here. I'm sure all of you were able to do it. This was a fairly simple one, but it seems that BogdanDeac was able to break Magnus. It's something that does not happen very often, regardless of the opposition. Magnus missed it completely. Pawn to f5 with check, and he was in this position on move 49 that Magnus resigned, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once he moves the king, rook captures on b6, loses the full rook, and of course Magnus decided to resign here. So absolutely incredible. I mean, if you go back some 25 moves, where did we say, like, what was it? Okay, let's say here, okay, 40 seconds, and by playing pawn to d5. So this is move, okay, 23. On move 23, down to 20 seconds on the clock, that you can defeat Magnus in an equal endgame. Perhaps white could be a little bit better even. But yeah, he held his ground. He outplayed MagnusCarlsen, and in the end, he broke Magnus. It's absolutely incredible, something that does not happen often, and BogdanDeac was able to do it in Title Tuesday game with the black pieces in the final round, and he doesn't just beat Magnus in this game, he also wins the late Title Tuesday by taking down MagnusCarlsen in the final round. So yeah, absolutely incredible. You can see that, regardless of who your opponent is, regardless of how unlikely it is for you to, even get a playable position, great things could happen if you persevere and if you just, play chess. It's like Bobby Fischer said, play the position, not the opposition. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank GroznyChessFestival.org.gg, Frank W.H. Schaefer, Stephen Binder, Gautam Bhattacharya, and Ren Songhua for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions, but mostly covering the Fabiano Caruana mini saga until Friday when we have the big clash, Magnus Carlsen versus Hans Niemann. And like I said, I will probably stream that event. I haven't done it in quite a while, but for this one, I'm coming out of retirement. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you soon.